In developed nations, the smallest injustices and corruptions in our governments send us into a tailspin. But for much of the world, government and corporate cover-ups are common and almost impossible to fight, especially if you're an Indigenous person fighting against mines and resource developers. Hey everybody, I'm Alice Ford, an environmentalist with a passion for sharing the real stories of nature, environmental justice, and wildlife. This is the Nature News channel. Please support us by giving this video a thumbs up and hitting subscribe. In some countries like Guatemala, mining corporations have been killing its opposers for decades. Indigenous Maya that live in Estor Guatemala have been fighting a ferronickel mine for almost 50 years. The mine project is called the Fenix Project, and it's now owned by a Swiss company. They mine nickel and ferronickel near the shores of Lake Isabel in Estor, Guatemala. Now, ferronickel is used in the making of the widely used product stainless steel. It plays a key role in all developed and developing economies, is used in numerous applications like engineering, transportation, electrical and electronics, building and construction materials, metal goods, and tubular products. It also enables the production of vital products with special properties like batteries and catalytic converters, as well as other electronic parts. Now, the area around Estor is inhabited by almost 90% Indigenous people that survive off the lake and its surrounding ecosystem, and they are extremely concerned that pollution from this mine and its processing plant are entering Lake Isabel, which is the country's largest lake. Now, this company actually claims that no pollution is entering the lake at all, but it's only provided its own internal sponsored testing of the lake's pollution and has sworn to the government and the local people that there's no pollution entering the lake and that the pollution that is getting worse in the lake is actually coming from those local communities. This lake supports not only the life of Indigenous people, but manatee, monkey, crocodile, and countless other species. It has been seeing a rise in pollution and a decline in the fish population over the last 30 to 50 years. The locals in these communities have been concerned over the last several decades about this mine, its existence, and what they're doing there, and the pollution that is coming from its processing plant. And in recent years, they have been protesting a lot. Now, this is because they actually have not been asked to the table of stakeholders, which is one of the requirements of any sort of natural resource development in almost every country, that they form basically a stakeholder panel made up of important people from different government officials to corporations within that industry, but it's also supposed to include local community members. And in this area, it's not. So this local community has been protesting against the mine and its government's protection, basically, of this mine being allowed to continue on with their work. In February of last year, the Guatemalan government actually put a cease and desist on this mining company, but through some loopholes, they were actually able to keep their processing plant open. And the locals now have been protesting that because they see that as one of the big polluting sources going into the lake. And they see this as a form of government corruption, that there's been a loophole that has allowed this basically company within the company to continue operating because it was owned by a subsidiary of the company and not the company itself. Now, these protests have actually led to a government lockdown of the town of Estor. They've had daily raids and curfews as the military looks for weapons inside local homes and have even arrested several journalists. Over the years, many of the Indigenous locals that have opposed the mine have actually been shot and killed by mine employees, including several college students that were just trying to take water samples of the lake under a university-funded research project. Now, every time the mine or its employees are taken to court and found guilty of slayings, the sentences are later overturned. This level of corruption is heartbreaking, but it happens all too often. And an almost identical story has been happening in Ecuador. But luckily there, after years of protests, murders, and injustices, the government is supporting the Indigenous community and letting them be part of the conversation. This was after the local community sued the government for selling mining concessions on their land without consultation. The locals won that case, and according to Ecuador's constitution, indigenous and tribal communities have a right to the process of consultation before extraction or infrastructure activity is planned on or near their land. Now, both oil and mining combined equate for about 8% of Ecuador's GDP, and earlier this year, their president called for the rapid expansion of both of these sectors to address the country's economic woes that have seen unemployment and poverty rise during the pandemic. Now, much like Ecuador, in Guatemala, mining is a huge part of the economy, but its operation should be consensual between the corporations and the landowners. We struggle with this same issue here in the United States with our native populations. As per our treaties with tribes, the land they have, it's not really owned by them, but merely leased to them by the US government, which is why so many tribes struggle to protect their land, their water, and their air from outside corporations mining, piping, and using their resources. Now, mining is just, unfortunately, a necessary evil. Without these substances, many of today's buildings, electronics, batteries, and modern conveniences can't be built. Nobody, though, wants a mine in their own backyard. Sadly, it's a lot harder to put one in the backyard of a rich community than a poor or indigenous one. And sadly, indigenous communities worldwide have fewer rights, they have fewer stakeholders, and less influence than other parties. So it's a lot easier for governments and corporations to manipulate and control them. But there has to be a way for us to mine and process materials that's less polluting. But it means that all of us have to pay more for materials. So the question is always the same. Are you willing to pay more to help the planet? These stories of indigenous people and mining projects are only going to grow as more metals are needed for batteries, building materials, and electronics. Things like nickel, lithium, lead, these things don't grow on trees. And just like natural gas and oil, they can devastate air and water in the areas nearby. We can't stop progress because we live in a consumer-driven world where people will always want to build, buy, and consume more things. But we can all help indigenous communities by sharing these stories and pressuring these big corporations to be more sustainable. I've actually linked these stories in the description so you can read more about them as well. Consumerism is one of those things that I really struggle with on a daily basis because I live in a city, I drive a car, I have a lot of electronics. Just like all of you as Americans or even Europeans, we have a lot more money than most people. We are able to buy a lot more products than most people. We are able to buy a lot more frivolous things, stuff that we don't really need to get by in life, but things that might make it easier. And most of those products, the materials come from mines, whether it be in Ecuador or Guatemala or South America, Brazil, Argentina, even in New Mexico, there's a ton of mines, in Canada as well. So while none of us want mines in our backyard, if we want to continue having the lifestyles that we're used to, there has to be mines. And there has to be oil and gas drilling and other sorts of resource extraction. But we also need to be able to find a way to be able to do this without harming the environment and harming local and indigenous communities. You know, New Mexico, I'm going to keep bringing up because here in the United States, that's one of our most resource-rich states, and it's very much exploited because I think we have such a large Native American population there with the Navajo and the Hopi. A lot of their sacred land has been developed and exploited for oil and gas, for fracking, for lithium mining, for the storage of our toxic and nuclear waste. So they really always seem to get the short end of the stick, and I don't think that's fair. But we all have to make choices in our life to be less materialistic, to buy less things, to think about the life cycle of where our things are coming from and where they're going to go when we're done using them. So as we get into the holiday season here, I just want this video to be a reminder to you to really think about what you're buying, what you're gifting, what you're asking for as far as gifts, and what you really need. You know, I always think that experiences are far more memorable, far more priceless than any sort of material object that you can get. And one of my goals for next year is just to be more of a minimalist. I have a lot of things from my parents, and I know, a lot of you guys are probably the same, where you just kind of collect things over and over. And I'm definitely trying to do that. I want to get by with less so that I can be more of a steward to this planet and be less of a materialistic, consumeristic person. I think I do a much better job than most people. I'm not a supporter of fast fashion. I don't shop and really buy much unless I really need it, unless it's, of course, a new camera or something like that. But, and then when I do buy new things, I recycle the old things, or I sell them, or I give them away to people that need it more than I do. So I do really try to think about it and put more thought into the things that I purchase. As we, come closer to Christmas as well, and whatever holidays you might celebrate, I think it's also important to start thinking about places and communities that you can support that might be less or more valuable, I guess, than shopping at Target or Walmart. See if there's some local Indigenous fair trade artisans that you can support, and, look for certified B corporations, 1% for the planet. There's so many fair trade organizations, like Globin is a great one that I like, that also sells fair trade artisan items from all around the world. But there's just a lot more ways that we can be supporting and helping the communities that don't necessarily have a big voice in this world, that really, get shit on, excuse my French, by the government and big corporations. So we can all do a little bit better. And I will start with me, for instance, in my next year, just trying to be less of a consumer and more of a minimalist. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know this is a long rant at the end, but I think it's such an important topic to talk about, where all of our stuff is made from and how we get all these materials that build our buildings and make our vehicles and provide materials for our cell phones and our video cameras and our stainless steel refrigerators. So all of that stuff came from somewhere. And while we all want to point fingers at everyone for climate change and for the destruction of our rainforests and our oceans, we're all part of the problem, and we all have to make some changes in order for things to get better. So have a great holiday, everyone. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please support this channel by giving this video a thumbs up, hitting that subscribe button if you're new, and sharing it with a friend that loves nature, wildlife, and the environment. See you next time.